A mountain man's kindness brought 1,000 Apaches to his ranch at dawn. The mountain man was known simply as Elias to the few people who had ever spoken his name. He lived far from towns, far from roads, and even farther from trouble, or so he believed. His ranch sat in a wide valley where pine-covered hills met open grassland, a place most people avoided because it felt too quiet, too untouched. Elias chose it for that very reason. Silence had become his closest companion. He had not always lived this way. Years earlier, he had tried life among people. He had worked, planned, and hoped like any other man. But loss had a way of changing him. One hard winter had taken everything he cared about, leaving behind memories that felt heavier than the mountains themselves. After that, Elias stopped explaining himself. He packed what little he owned, rode west, and never looked back. Life on the ranch was simple but demanding. Elias woke before sunrise each day, his body trained by years of routine. He fed his horses, checked his fences, and walked the land slowly, as if greeting it. He spoke rarely, but when he did, it was to the animals or to the wind. He trusted the land more than people. The land, at least, was honest. Nearby settlements knew of him, though no one truly knew him. Some said he was unfriendly. Others said he was dangerous. Most simply said he was different. Elias did not care what they believed. He traded supplies once every few months, paid fairly, and left without lingering. He never argued, never boasted, and never asked questions. The land he lived on sat close to Apache territory. Everyone knew that. Most settlers avoided the area for that reason alone. Fear lived easily in those days, fed by rumors and old stories passed from one person to another, growing larger each time. Elias had heard those stories too. He listened, nodded, and went on with his life. He believed fear often came from not knowing, and he had learned long ago that not all warnings were truths. Elias had seen Apache families from a distance before. Sometimes he noticed smoke rising far away. Sometimes he found tracks near a stream. He never followed them, and they never followed him. There was an unspoken understanding of space, and Elias respected it. His ranch was not large, but it was well cared for. He built it with his own hands, log by log, board by board. Each mark in the wood told a story of effort and patience. The house was sturdy, warm in winter, and cool in summer. Around it stood a small barn, a corral, and a field where grass grew thick enough for grazing. At night, Elias often sat on his porch watching the sky darken. Stars appeared slowly, one by one, filling the silence with light. Those moments brought him peace. They reminded him that the world was bigger than his grief, bigger than his past. Still, the past never fully left him. It lived quietly in his thoughts, especially when the night grew long. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Elias noticed something unusual. A distant movement near the edge of his land caught his eye. He stood still, watching carefully. At first he thought it might be deer, but the shapes were wrong. Too slow, too uneven. He narrowed his eyes and waited. The figures did not come closer. They stayed near the trees, barely visible. Elias felt no rush of fear, only curiosity mixed with caution. He went inside his house and waited, listening to the night sounds. Crickets chirped. An owl called. Nothing else disturbed the quiet. By morning, the valley looked the same as always. No signs, no tracks near the house. Elias went about his work, but something felt different. The air itself seemed to hold a question. He pushed the feeling aside and focused on what needed to be done. Days passed, yet that sense of change remained. Elias found tracks near a creek one afternoon, small ones mixed with larger footprints. He studied them carefully. They were not threatening, just signs of travel. He followed them briefly, then stopped. Whoever had passed through had already moved on. Elias made a choice that day without fully realizing it. He left fresh water near the creek before returning home. He told himself it was for animals. But deep down, he knew it was for people too. He did not expect anything to come of it. Kindness, to him, was not a trade. It was simply something you did when you could. He had learned that lesson long ago, in a life that now felt like it belonged to someone else. As weeks went by, the land remained calm. No visits, no signs of trouble. Elias relaxed, though he never stopped being alert. Living alone had taught him to notice small details. A broken branch, a bird that flew too suddenly, a silence that felt wrong. One late afternoon, clouds rolled in, dark and heavy. A storm was coming fast. Elias secured his animals and closed the barn. Rain began to fall in thick drops, turning the ground soft and slick. Thunder echoed across the valley. That was when he saw them. Near the same line of trees as before, several figures appeared, this time clearly human. They moved slowly, as if exhausted. Elias stood under the porch roof, watching. He could see they were struggling, weighed down by more than just the weather. Some leaned on others. One figure stumbled and was helped back up. Elias felt the old pull inside him, the instinct to stay apart, to protect his solitude. But another feeling rose stronger. He remembered what it was like to be desperate, to need help and not know where to turn. He walked inside, filled a few containers with water, and grabbed extra blankets. He hesitated only once before stepping back out into the rain. He did not shout or wave. He simply walked toward the open ground, stopping well before the trees. He set the items down where they could be seen, then stepped back. The figures paused. There was a long moment of stillness, broken only by the sound of rain. Finally, one person stepped forward cautiously, then another. Elias stayed where he was, hands visible, posture calm. No words were spoken. None were needed. After a short while, the group took the water and blankets. They nodded once in Elias's direction before retreating into the trees. The entire exchange lasted only minutes, but it felt much longer. When Elias returned to his house, his heart was beating faster than usual. Not from fear, but from the weight of what had just happened. He sat down, staring at the wooden floor, wondering if he had done the right thing. That night, sleep came slowly. His mind replayed the moment again and again. He knew his life might not remain the same after this, but for the first time in years he did not regret a choice he had made. Outside, the storm passed. The valley returned to silence. Yet something unseen had begun to move, quietly, steadily, toward a dawn that would change everything. Elias woke the next morning to a sky painted with soft orange and pink. The storm had left the air fresh, the valley sparkling with droplets clinging to every blade of grass and pine needle. The sun warmed the cold ground, and birds began their morning songs. Life felt quiet and ordinary, yet Elias knew it would not stay that way. The memory of the previous evening lingered in his mind, more vivid than any dream. The exhausted figures by the trees, the cautious nods, the silent gratitude, it all made him feel uneasy and alive at the same time. He went about his usual work, feeding the horses and checking fences, but his hands moved more slowly, and his mind wandered. Who were those people? Why had they come that far, so clearly in need? He had left them water and blankets, yes, but he knew it was not enough. They needed more than a few hours of care. They needed safety, food, and rest. Yet he told himself again and again that he was just one man. One man could not change the world. Still, he could not forget the look in their eyes. Tired, wary, but full of a strange trust. Elias had lived with animals and nature for years, and he knew that trust was rare. It was earned, not given lightly, and yet somehow he had earned it, if only a little. The following days were tense in a quiet, invisible way. Elias kept watch from the porch, noticing every rustle in the trees, every distant sound that was not the wind. He began to find more signs of movement near his ranch. Broken branches, footprints softened in the damp earth, and sometimes a shadow glimpsed just beyond the tree line. Nothing came closer. No one came forward again. Yet he could feel them. He could feel that someone, or perhaps many someones, were near, watching, deciding. Elias did not speak to anyone about it. There were no visitors, no letters, no travelers to whom he could confide his thoughts. He spoke only to his animals and to the wind, as he had done for years. Yet even in solitude, the weight of anticipation pressed on him. Something was coming, something that he could not yet see. Then, one afternoon, it happened. While checking the fence along the creek, he heard faint voices, soft and careful, carrying over the distance. They were speaking in a language he did not know, but he understood the tone. It was conversation, full of caution and curiosity. He froze, listening, his heart beating steadily. They were close, but they had not yet revealed themselves. Elias thought about what to do. Part of him wanted to retreat, to stay behind the safety of his fences and walls. Another part, a stronger part, reminded him of the reason he had given water and blankets in the first place. The choice had been simple then, and it was simple now. He could show kindness again, or he could hide. He chose to stand firm. He returned to his house and prepared. He filled several containers with water, gathered more blankets, and set aside extra food. He wanted to make sure that if they came closer, no one would go without help. He did not prepare weapons. He did not prepare traps. He prepared for care. He did not know what they might do, but he knew that fear could be stronger than anger, and that sometimes courage alone could make a difference. As the sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the valley, he heard footsteps on the soft earth. Elias stepped outside and waited. From the trees, a small group emerged. A family, he guessed. A man, a woman, and 2 children. They moved carefully, never breaking eye contact with him, never raising their hands. The woman carried a bundle of possessions wrapped in cloth, the children clinging to her skirts. Elias nodded to them, offering no words. He set down the containers of water and blankets where they could see, just as he had before. The man stepped forward cautiously, then looked back at the others. They approached slowly, taking the offerings, their hands brushing against the edges. A faint smile passed between them, almost hidden, but it reached Elias's eyes. For a moment, all was silent except for the wind and the distant call of birds. Elias felt something shift in the air, an understanding that had formed without a single word spoken. The family lingered only a moment, then retreated back toward the tree line, disappearing almost as quickly as they had arrived. Elias watched them go, his mind racing with thoughts. He wondered how many more were near, waiting, watching, deciding if they could trust him too. Over the next few days, more signs appeared. Footprints, small fires in the distance, and glimpses of shadows moving through the trees. It became clear that the group he had seen was not alone. Others were nearby, perhaps waiting for the right moment to come forward, perhaps sharing stories of the man who had shown kindness without question. Elias began to see the truth. His simple act had consequences he could not control, yet despite the tension, he did not regret it. He felt a strange sense of pride, not pride in himself, but in the idea that even one person could make a difference. He thought of the family, of the gratitude in their eyes, and he knew he had made the right choice. One night, he sat by the fire, thinking of the world beyond his valley. He remembered stories of settlers and native families, stories of fear, anger, and misunderstanding. He had seen enough to know that history was filled with conflict, often born from fear and ignorance. He also knew that sometimes small acts of courage and kindness could shift the course of events in ways that history would later notice, even if quietly. As he stared into the flames, Elias made another choice. He would not hide. He would not retreat. If they came closer, he would help them. He would continue to offer what he could, even if he did not know the outcome. It was a choice that carried risk, yes, but also hope. The days continued with the same quiet tension. Elias went about his work, feeding animals, tending fields, repairing fences, and watching the tree line. Every sound was noticed, every movement studied. The wind through the pines seemed to carry whispers, voices he could not understand, but whose meaning was clear. They were near. Then, as the first light of one new day broke across the valley, he noticed something remarkable. Several figures appeared at the edge of the trees, more than before. Perhaps 20, perhaps 30, moving slowly and deliberately. They were families, he guessed, with children and elders. They had come farther than the small family he had seen before. Their trust was stronger than fear. Elias stepped outside as usual, setting water and blankets where they could see. This time, there was no hesitation. The figures approached, gathering around what he had left. They spoke quietly among themselves, sharing small smiles, nods, and gestures. Elias did not understand their words, but he understood the meaning: acceptance, cautious gratitude, and curiosity. For hours, the group lingered near the ranch, neither intruding nor leaving. They ate, drank, and rested. Elias watched carefully, noting their movements, but he did not intervene unnecessarily. He learned their rhythms, their small gestures of care for each other, the way elders guided children, the way men helped the young. He saw respect, patience, and a shared understanding among them that reminded him of the quiet harmony of nature. By evening, the figures had retreated, returning to the tree line. Elias stood on the porch and watched until they disappeared completely. He felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. Something was happening here, something that went beyond the ordinary. His small acts of kindness were being noticed, shared, and returned in trust. That night, Elias did not sleep easily. His mind was alive with possibilities, worries, and hope. He thought about the future, about what might come next. He had learned that life could change in a single moment, and that courage and kindness could ripple outward in ways he could not yet see. He knew, deep in his heart, that the quiet valley he had chosen for solitude might soon be filled with more visitors. People in need, drawn not by fear, but by stories of a man who did not turn away. And though he felt the weight of the unknown, he also felt something new. The possibility that one life, lived with care and courage, could touch many others. Elias lay awake, listening to the night sounds, the wind through the pines, the distant calls of nocturnal animals, the rustle of leaves, all seemed different now. The valley was no longer just his home. It was becoming a place of connection, of quiet understanding between strangers. And though he did not yet know what the future held, he felt ready to meet it, one step at a time, with open hands and a steady heart. Elias awoke to the soft glow of morning sunlight spilling over the hills. The storm had passed, leaving the valley fresh and clean, the grass sparkling with droplets, and the air crisp with the scent of pine. He stepped outside his cabin, stretching and breathing deeply. The quiet of the valley felt heavier than usual, almost as if it were holding its own secret. He remembered the group of figures he had seen by the tree line days before, moving carefully and cautiously, taking the water and blankets he had left. That small moment had stayed with him, a mixture of curiosity, pride, and unease that he could not shake. Life on the ranch continued as it always had. Elias fed the horses, checked the fences, and tended to his small field. But even as he moved through these familiar tasks, his mind kept returning to the people he had seen. Who were they? How far had they come to reach his land? And why had they not stayed or spoken? Elias did not know their language, yet he felt he could understand their intentions through their movements and gestures. They had been tired, careful, respectful. They had trusted him, even for a brief moment, and that trust had planted something inside him, an awareness that his small actions could have consequences beyond what he imagined. Over the next few days, Elias noticed signs of their presence more clearly. He found footprints near the creek that were too human and too intentional to be animals. Small fires, quickly extinguished, left tiny smoke stains in the ground. Branches were broken in a deliberate pattern, as if someone had moved through the area with care but had wanted to be noticed. Sometimes he glimpsed shadows among the trees, just at the corner of his vision, enough to make him pause and watch. Though he felt no immediate danger, Elias knew that his actions had drawn attention. He considered retreating, staying within the safety of his ranch, avoiding further interaction, but he could not. The first act of kindness, the water and blankets, had been done without thought of reward or consequence, and now he realized that stepping back would betray that choice. The people he had helped had trusted him, and that trust mattered more than his fear of the unknown. He had learned in his life that courage and kindness often demanded action, even when the outcome was uncertain. One afternoon, while repairing a section of fence near the creek, Elias heard voices carried by the wind. They were faint and unfamiliar, speaking in a language he did not understand, but he could sense the tone. Curiosity, caution, conversation without hostility. He stopped what he was doing, listening carefully. The voices faded as quickly as they had appeared, leaving only the soft rustling of leaves and the gentle flow of the creek. Elias felt a stirring of anticipation. Whoever these people were, they were nearby, observing, deciding, waiting. He returned to his cabin and made a choice. He would prepare for their visit. Elias filled containers with water, set out blankets, and gathered extra food. He wanted to ensure that if they approached again, they would find help waiting. He did not arm himself. He did not set traps. Instead, he prepared to meet them with openness, guided by a simple principle: care without expectation. That evening, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, a small group appeared at the edge of the trees. A man and a woman walked carefully, their hands guiding two small children. Their movements were slow, deliberate, cautious. Elias stepped outside quietly, placing the water and blankets where they could see them. He did not call out or wave. He simply waited, letting them choose whether to come closer. The family approached carefully, taking the supplies he had left. The woman held the children close, gently guiding them as they knelt to drink and eat. The man looked toward Elias but did not speak, his expression unreadable yet respectful. For a long moment they were all still, observing each other in silence. No words were exchanged, yet understanding passed between them. Elias could feel it in the careful way they treated the supplies, in the nods and gestures, in the quiet trust that had formed in an instant. After a while, the group began to retreat, moving back toward the trees, with the children holding tightly to their parents' hands. Elias watched them disappear into the shadows, feeling a mixture of relief and wonder. His quiet life had been touched by something larger, something beyond his daily routines. He realized that trust, once given, could travel far and ripple in ways he had never anticipated. In the days that followed, Elias noticed more signs of people near the ranch. Tracks appeared in the soft earth, small fires were lit and carefully extinguished, and shadows moved among the trees. It became clear that the family he had seen was not alone. Others were nearby, observing him, sharing stories of the man who had shown care without question. Elias felt a growing sense of responsibility. His actions had consequences, and he would need to continue making careful, thoughtful choices. One night, as he sat by the fire, Elias reflected on the nature of trust. He thought about his life, about the losses and loneliness that had brought him to this remote valley. He remembered the times he had felt helpless, the nights he had longed for kindness, for guidance, for someone to extend a hand. Now, in a quiet and unexpected way, he was the one giving that hand. He understood that courage was not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet, consistent, and patient. Elias also thought about the future. He knew that more people might come, drawn by the stories of kindness and trust. He wondered how he would meet them, how he would continue to live in harmony with both the land and those who might seek his help. He understood that kindness came with risk, but he believed that the potential for good outweighed the fear of the unknown. Days turned into a week, and the pattern continued. Small groups of people came closer, quietly observing, cautiously approaching the supplies he left for them. Elias learned to read their gestures, their movements, their quiet signals of trust and hesitation. He discovered a rhythm in this interaction, a careful dance of respect and patience. He came to understand that the world was filled with people who were cautious, who had reasons to fear, but who also longed for kindness and safety. One evening, a larger group appeared near the tree line, perhaps 20 people. They moved slowly and deliberately, families with children and elders. Elias felt a surge of both excitement and responsibility. He stepped outside, placing water, blankets, and extra food where they could see them. He did not speak, but his presence alone seemed to signal welcome. The group approached cautiously, sharing quiet gestures among themselves, acknowledging his offerings without words. Hours passed. The families ate, drank, and rested, always aware of each other, always careful. Elias watched, learning from them as much as he offered. He observed the ways they cared for one another, guiding children and elders, supporting each other quietly and respectfully. Their presence taught him patience, humility, and the value of simple acts of cooperation. When evening fell, the group retreated into the trees, leaving Elias alone once again. But he was no longer the same man who had lived in quiet isolation. His life had begun to change in small, subtle ways. He understood that trust, once given, had power. He saw that kindness could ripple outward, touching lives in ways he could not yet imagine. That night he lay awake, listening to the sounds of the valley. The wind rustled through the pines, and the distant calls of nocturnal birds filled the air. He felt the quiet presence of those he had helped, knowing they were nearby, perhaps sharing stories of the man who had shown care without question. A new sense of purpose had taken root inside him. He knew that his life, once defined by solitude and loss, was becoming something more, something connected to the world beyond his land. Elias understood that he could not control the future, but he could continue to choose how he acted in each moment. Each day offered an opportunity to extend care, to nurture trust, and to build understanding. He knew that what he had started was fragile, dependent on patience and respect, but he also knew it had begun. Something larger than himself was taking shape, quietly, slowly, like the first light of dawn spilling over the valley hills. By the time the stars appeared in the sky, Elias felt a calm resolve. He would not retreat. He would not ignore those who came seeking help. He would continue to live in a way that honored the trust and respect that had been extended to him, and he felt deep in his heart that one small act of kindness could grow into something far greater than he had ever imagined, a bridge between worlds, a quiet promise of connection, and a story that might one day be told beyond the valley where he lived. Days passed in a quiet rhythm, but Elias felt a growing tension in the valley. The signs of life near his ranch had become more frequent. Footprints of different sizes crisscrossed the soft earth along the creek. Small fires left tiny traces of smoke in the distance. Shadows moved between the trees, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, always just out of reach. Elias could sense that something was changing. It was not a threat, but it was unmistakable. The people he had helped before were now close, watching, learning, and perhaps deciding what to do next. Elias could not sleep well. Every night he listened carefully to the valley, the whisper of the wind through pine needles, the distant calls of owls, the rustle of branches where animals moved. Sometimes he thought he heard quiet human voices, but when he stepped outside, the valley was empty. Still, the feeling remained. They were near, and they were aware of him. He wondered how many there were, whether they would trust him again, and whether he was ready for whatever came next. He spent the days keeping up with his usual chores, feeding the horses, mending fences, and tending the land. But his mind was never free from thought. Who were these people? How had word of his kindness traveled so quickly? He realized that what he had done, simple though it was, had started to ripple outward. He had offered water and blankets without thinking, but the effect of that small action was now larger than he could control. One afternoon, Elias noticed a group moving along the ridge above the creek. They were far enough away that he could not see faces clearly, but there were at least 10 of them. He stopped what he was doing and observed. Their movements were careful, deliberate, almost ceremonial. They seemed to be watching each other, checking in silently, yet they never looked directly at him. It was as if they were coordinating, deciding, and communicating in a way that he could not understand. Elias returned to his house and prepared once again. He filled containers with fresh water, laid out extra blankets, and set aside food for anyone who might come. He felt a strange mixture of excitement and fear. He did not know who these people were exactly, but he understood enough to know that they had noticed him, that they were aware of his presence, and that they had begun to trust him, at least a little. As evening fell, the wind shifted, carrying distant voices to his ears. He could not understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. These were conversations, not commands. They were deciding, planning, and speaking with care. Elias felt his pulse quicken. The first group he had met had been small and cautious. This was different. This was larger, more deliberate, and he sensed the beginnings of an important event. Night came, and Elias stayed on the porch longer than usual. The stars stretched across the sky like a silent audience, and the valley below was dark except for the faint glimmer of the creek. He heard soft footsteps moving through the underbrush. A few figures appeared at the edge of the trees. They were not alone. Small groups followed, moving carefully, waiting for a signal he could not see. Elias watched silently, studying their movements. He could feel the trust building, the cautious approach that had begun with his first small act of kindness. One figure stepped forward cautiously. It was an elder, whose face was lined with experience and wisdom. Elias recognized the quiet authority that comes with leadership. The elder approached the supplies he had set out, inspecting them carefully. He nodded once, then gestured to the others. Slowly, more people came forward. Men, women, and children. Elias stayed where he was, hands visible, posture calm. He did not speak, did not wave, did not make sudden movements. He simply waited. The group accepted the water and blankets. The children drank first, followed by their parents. The elder carefully distributed the blankets among the families. Elias observed quietly, noticing the subtle ways they cared for one another. No one rushed. No one argued. Everything was done with patience and respect. It reminded him of the natural rhythms of the land, where everything had its time, its place, and its way of being. The elder finally stepped closer to Elias, standing a few feet away. Their eyes met, and Elias felt a connection stronger than any words could create. He sensed gratitude, curiosity, and a cautious respect. The elder nodded slightly, then returned to the group, signaling that it was time to leave. The families slowly retreated toward the trees, moving in unison, careful not to disturb the valley. Elias watched until they disappeared completely. The next few days were filled with a sense of anticipation. Elias continued his work, but he noticed the patterns in the valley more keenly. Footprints appeared in new places. Fires were lit and extinguished quickly. Shadows moved among the trees, watching, waiting. Elias understood that the group had communicated among themselves, sharing stories of the man who had shown kindness without fear. He realized that trust could grow quietly, almost invisibly, spreading from one family to another. One morning, Elias woke to find new tracks near the creek, larger footprints this time, accompanied by the smaller ones of children. He followed them briefly, careful not to disturb the earth too much. The tracks led to a small clearing where he saw remnants of a temporary camp, a circle of stones for a fire, some leaves arranged for sleeping, and the marks of careful, deliberate movement. The people had stayed there briefly, perhaps for safety, perhaps to plan, but they had left no trace of harm. Elias smiled quietly. Their presence was peaceful, deliberate, and respectful, just as he had hoped. Over the next several days, Elias noticed that the groups near his ranch were becoming more organized. He saw them communicating with small gestures, coordinating movements, and sharing responsibilities. They were patient, deliberate, and careful. Children and elders were treated with care, and families moved together as a single unit. Elias realized that this was a culture built on trust, patience, and respect, qualities that he recognized from his own solitary life. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Elias noticed a new sign. A larger group had gathered near the tree line, perhaps 30 or 40 people. They moved slowly, deliberately, as if preparing for a visit. Elias felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This was different from the smaller groups that had come before. They were organized, deliberate, and cautious, yet he sensed that something important was about to happen. He prepared as he had before, setting out water, blankets, and extra food. He stepped outside and waited quietly, watching the group approach. They did not rush. They did not shout. They moved in careful unison, guided by the gestures of their elders. Elias noticed the quiet discipline, the way children followed the adults without fear, the way everyone seemed aware of the other's needs. It was a display of respect, coordination, and trust that impressed him deeply. The elder from the previous visit stepped forward again. He inspected the offerings, nodded, and gestured to the group. The families accepted the supplies with careful hands, taking what they needed and leaving nothing behind. Elias watched closely, noticing the small details, the careful way the blankets were wrapped, the way food was shared among children, the way each person looked out for the other. As night fell, the group retreated toward the trees, leaving Elias alone once again. But he no longer felt the isolation that had marked his early years on the ranch. He felt connected to the people who had begun to trust him, connected to the valley, and connected to a growing sense of purpose. He understood that his actions, small as they had been, were building something larger than himself, a bridge of trust and care between his life and the lives of those he had helped. That night, Elias lay awake longer than usual. He listened to the sounds of the valley, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of owls, the gentle flow of the creek. He imagined the people nearby, safe for now, resting quietly after a long day. He thought about the patterns he had seen, the trust that was growing, and the way his small acts of kindness had started to ripple outward. He knew the valley would not remain quiet for long. More people would come, drawn by the stories of a man who showed care without expectation. They would come cautiously, guided by the trust of the families who had already met him. And when they did, he would be ready. He would continue to extend care, patience, and respect, building the trust that had already begun. Elias understood something important that night. Courage and kindness were not always loud or dramatic. They could be quiet, consistent, and patient. They could grow in small, invisible ways, touching lives without immediate recognition. And he felt a quiet hope that the trust he had started to build could lead to something extraordinary, something that would change not only his life, but the lives of many others who were willing to follow the path of trust and respect. As the stars filled the sky, Elias closed his eyes, feeling a calm resolve. The valley, once a place of solitude, had begun to transform into a place of connection. He was no longer alone. His actions, small as they had seemed, had created a ripple that would continue to spread, and he knew that the dawn of something remarkable was approaching, a moment that would test the patience, courage, and kindness he had offered, and show the true power of a single choice made with a good heart. The night was unusually quiet. Elias lay awake on his simple bed, listening to the valley. The wind whispered through the pines, and the stars stretched endlessly above. He could feel it in his bones, the anticipation of something he could neither see nor fully understand. For days, the signs had grown stronger. Footprints, fires, shadows, and glimpses of families moving carefully in the trees. He had prepared as best he could, yet he knew that whatever arrived next could change his life forever. Just before dawn, Elias stepped outside. The world was still, painted in soft gray light, and the first hints of sunlight were just beginning to touch the hills. He could see movement far along the tree line. A slow, steady approach of figures. At first he thought it was only a few more families, but as he watched, the shapes multiplied. More and more figures appeared, moving carefully and deliberately. There were hundreds of them. Elias's breath caught. He counted quickly in his mind, realizing that there were perhaps 1,000 people approaching his ranch. Men, women, and children moved in quiet, organized lines. They carried nothing threatening. Their eyes were calm, their movements controlled, and yet there was a powerful sense of presence. He had never seen anything like it in his life. The stories he had heard about large groups of people moving in silence could not compare to this. It was real, and it was happening in his valley. He took a step forward and set out containers of water, blankets, and extra food where they could easily see them. He did not shout. He did not wave. He only stood quietly, hands visible, ready to meet them with calm and openness. The first rows of people paused, looking toward him. There were no weapons raised, no signs of threat, just faces, curious, calm, respectful. They waited, as if for a signal, and Elias understood. Slowly, the elder he had met before stepped forward. His eyes scanned the supplies, then met Elias's with a calm certainty. He gestured to the others, and the crowd began to approach in measured steps. Children held tightly to their parents' hands. Families stayed together, moving in quiet harmony. Men and women shared smiles and small gestures of reassurance. Every movement was deliberate, careful, and filled with respect. Elias felt a mixture of awe and nervousness. 1,000 people, all standing on his land, not to demand, but to honor. He had prepared for small groups, maybe 20 or 30, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from the gravity of the moment. Every act he had taken, offering water, blankets, kindness, had led to this, and now the consequences were here, tangible and undeniable. The group reached the edge of his ranch. Elias watched as the elder and several others carefully inspected the supplies. Water was handed to those who needed it first, children, elders, and then the adults. Blankets were distributed with care, ensuring that each family had enough to rest and remain dry. Food was shared equally, without haste or argument. Elias observed quietly, noticing the subtle ways they cared for one another. Every act spoke of respect, patience, and an understanding of trust that went beyond words. He realized that this was more than a visit. It was a statement of gratitude and trust, a demonstration that one act of kindness could resonate far beyond its origin. Elias felt a warmth in his chest, a quiet pride that was not about himself, but about the power of small, deliberate choices. He had lived most of his life alone, believing that isolation was safety. Now, he saw that connection could be just as powerful, if not stronger. The elder finally stepped closer to Elias, standing a few feet away. Their eyes met, and Elias felt an unspoken understanding pass between them. The elder nodded slowly, then gestured to the group. It was a signal of peace and welcome. The crowd settled near the supplies, sitting, resting, and quietly observing the ranch. Children played gently among themselves, laughing softly while adults spoke in low tones, sharing stories and instructions. Elias felt overwhelmed by the scale of it, yet a calm resolve grew inside him. He walked among them carefully, offering more blankets and water where needed. There were no sudden movements, no loud voices. Everything was slow, deliberate, filled with care. He noticed how families supported one another, older children helping younger ones, adults guiding the elders, everyone aware of each other's needs. It reminded him of the natural balance of the land, where every element has its place and role. Hours passed. The sun rose higher, casting light across the valley and illuminating the vast crowd that had gathered. Elias had never imagined his quiet ranch could hold so many people, yet it did, not by force, but by trust and respect. He watched as families shared stories, children learned from the elders, and everyone moved with a rhythm that was both natural and extraordinary. The elder approached him again. This time he spoke in a way Elias could understand. Not words, but gestures and expressions. Gratitude, respect, and a sense of mutual understanding were clear. Elias nodded in return, acknowledging the trust that had been extended to him. He understood that this moment would be remembered by all who were present, a quiet testament to what kindness and courage could create. As the day progressed, more families arrived, bringing with them a sense of community that Elias had not known for years. He helped where he could, offering supplies, guidance, and space for rest. He did not lead or command. He only observed, assisted, and ensured that their needs were met. Every small action mattered. A bucket of water handed to a child, a blanket placed carefully over an elder, a quiet nod of reassurance. By mid-afternoon, the full scale of the gathering was clear. 1,000 people stood or sat on his land, not as intruders, but as guests. Elias felt a deep sense of humility. He had lived alone for years, believing that solitude was the only way to protect himself from the world. Now he saw that connection, when built with trust and respect, could create something far stronger than isolation. The elder approached him one last time before the sun began to dip behind the hills. Their eyes met again, and Elias understood that this was more than gratitude. It was acknowledgement, a recognition that a single act of kindness, performed without expectation, could ripple outward to touch many lives. Elias nodded silently, feeling a quiet joy that was both humbling and empowering. As evening approached, the crowd began to settle in the valley around the ranch. Fires were lit in small, careful circles, and families gathered close to one another. The children played quietly, the adults shared stories, and the elders spoke in low, deliberate tones. Elias walked among them, making sure everyone had what they needed, yet always careful to respect their space and autonomy. He had learned that trust is maintained not through control, but through understanding and patience. Night fell, and the valley was transformed. What had once been a quiet, empty space was now alive with presence, connection, and gratitude. The stars shone above, mirrored by the small fires below. Elias sat on his porch, watching the scene unfold. He felt a profound sense of peace. His ranch, once a place of solitude and quiet reflection, had become a place of trust, community, and shared understanding. He understood, more deeply than ever, the power of kindness. A small act, offered without expectation, had grown into something extraordinary. It had brought together hundreds of people in peace and respect, and it had transformed his life as well. Elias knew that this moment would not be forgotten, that the ripple of trust and gratitude would continue far beyond the valley, and that the bonds formed here were stronger than any fear or doubt he had ever known. As he looked across the valley, Elias realized that he had not only provided for them, but they had also given him something invaluable, the knowledge that connection, courage, and kindness could change the course of lives. He had opened his home, his land, and his heart, and in return he had received trust, respect, and a profound sense of community. The night grew still, the valley calm, and Elias knew that dawn would come again. But this dawn had been remarkable. It had brought with it hundreds of lives filled with hope, respect, and trust. And as Elias watched the people quietly gathering, resting, and caring for one another, he felt certain that the choices he had made, simple choices made without expectation, had created something lasting, meaningful, and extraordinary. The valley was quiet again the next morning, but it was a quiet filled with a new kind of energy. The presence of the people who had arrived at Elias's ranch the day before still lingered in the air. Footprints covered the soft earth, small fires had left faint traces of smoke, and the faint murmur of voices carried on the wind. Elias stepped outside and looked over his land. Everything seemed the same, the trees, the hills, the creek, but everything also felt different. His ranch, once a place of solitude, had become a center of connection, a place where trust had been tested and proven. Elias walked among the remaining families, offering help where it was needed. Some had stayed to rest before continuing their journey, while others had returned to the hills beyond the valley. He gave blankets, water, and food, but also space and respect. He understood that his role was not to lead, but to support. The trust he had earned the day before was fragile, and he knew it needed care to grow. As the day progressed, he began to notice the subtle changes in himself. The quiet, reserved man who had lived alone for years was no longer the same. The experience had shown him the power of connection, the way a single act of kindness could ripple outward to touch hundreds of lives. He felt pride. But it was not pride of accomplishment. It was a quiet pride in knowing that he had made a choice to act with care, courage, and respect. And that choice had mattered. Families lingered near the ranch, preparing to move on. Elias helped them pack their few belongings and ensured that each person had what they needed for the journey ahead. Children ran and played for a few moments before they left, laughing softly, their joy contagious. Adults shared quiet words of thanks, gestures of gratitude, and bows of respect. Elias responded with gentle nods, understanding that words were not always necessary when actions had already spoken volumes. The elder he had first met approached him once again. Their eyes met, and for a long moment, neither spoke. In that silence, Elias understood everything the elder wanted to convey: gratitude, trust, and the recognition of a bond that had been formed through simple acts of kindness. The elder's nod was slow and deliberate, carrying with it the weight of history and the acknowledgement of the choices that had led to this moment. Elias realized that the valley, his home, and his life had been forever changed. The people who had come to him had not come to take, to demand, or to threaten. They had come to honor the courage and compassion he had shown, and in doing so, they had brought something invaluable in return: the knowledge that one life, lived with integrity, could touch many others. He understood that kindness was not just an act, it was a legacy. As the last families prepared to leave, Elias walked slowly along the edge of the creek. He paused to look at the footprints left behind, the signs of careful travel, and the traces of a community that had trusted him. He thought about the children he had seen, the elders who had smiled at him, and the families who had moved with quiet discipline and respect. He realized that he had witnessed something extraordinary, a gathering built on trust, patience, and understanding, and it had all begun because he had chosen to act with care. The day passed with the valley slowly returning to its usual quiet. The families had departed, carrying with them stories of a man who had lived alone, yet opened his heart and home to those in need. Elias returned to his cabin, his movements slow, thoughtful, and reflective. He tended the animals, repaired fences, and prepared food, but everything felt different now. There was a sense of connection in the air, a feeling that the valley itself had been transformed by the events that had unfolded. As evening fell, Elias sat on his porch and looked across the land he had called home for so many years. The hills, the trees, and the creek were as familiar as ever, but they seemed to shine with a new light. The valley had witnessed something rare, something remarkable, a demonstration of trust, courage, and the power of simple kindness. He understood that this moment, like all meaningful moments, would not last forever. People would continue their journeys, and life would return to its usual rhythms. Yet the memory of what had occurred, the lessons learned, and the bonds formed would remain. Elias thought about the nature of human connection. He had lived most of his life in solitude, believing that distance and caution were the safest ways to live. Yet he had discovered that openness, patience, and understanding could be just as strong, if not stronger, than walls or isolation. One choice, a single act of kindness, had created a ripple that affected hundreds of lives and changed the course of his own. He realized that courage was not always dramatic or loud. It could be quiet, deliberate, and consistent. The stars appeared in the night sky, bright and clear. Elias lay on the porch listening to the soft sounds of the valley. The wind rustled the trees, the creek gurgled gently, and distant wildlife stirred in the shadows. For the first time in years, he felt a profound sense of peace. The valley, once a place of isolation, had become a space of trust, care, and shared experience. And he knew that the memory of what had happened would live on, both in his heart and in the hearts of those who had visited. Over the following weeks, Elias continued his work on the ranch, but he did so with a new awareness. He was attentive to the signs in the valley, patient with the rhythms of life, and mindful of the way small actions could have large consequences. He understood that the ripple of trust and kindness he had created might reach far beyond what he could see. People might speak of his actions in their communities, passing on stories of the man who lived alone yet offered care without question. Elias often thought of the families who had visited. He wondered where they were, how they were traveling, and whether the lessons of trust and respect he had shared would continue to spread. He felt a quiet hope that the connections he had made would endure, that the bonds formed in the valley would continue to influence their lives and the lives of those they met. He understood that one life, lived with integrity, could inspire many others. One morning, as Elias walked along the creek, he noticed signs that some people had returned briefly, footprints that were careful, items left in a tidy arrangement, and evidence of respectful use of the land. He smiled quietly. Even in their absence, the presence of others was felt. He realized that the impact of kindness was not always immediate or visible, but it persisted in subtle ways, shaping the world quietly and profoundly. Elias reflected on his journey from solitude to connection. He had lived most of his life apart, yet through small acts of courage and kindness he had built bridges of trust that spanned distances and cultures. He understood that the greatest strength of human beings was not in weapons, walls, or isolation, but in empathy, respect, and understanding. One choice, made without expectation, had created a legacy far greater than he could have imagined. The valley continued to change with the seasons, but Elias carried with him the memory of that remarkable day. He knew that the bonds he had formed, the trust he had earned, and the gratitude he had received were gifts that would remain with him always. He had learned that the world, though often unpredictable and challenging, responded to courage, kindness, and the willingness to act with care. Years later, people would speak of the mountain man whose kindness brought hundreds of lives to his ranch. They would tell stories of the quiet courage, the patient care, and the deep respect that had allowed trust to grow in a place once defined by solitude. Elias himself did not seek recognition or fame. He lived simply, tending the land and observing the rhythms of life, yet he knew that the impact of his actions would endure, quietly shaping the lives of many. As the sun set over the valley, Elias stood on his porch watching the hills glow with the warm light of evening. He felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He had lived through hardship, solitude, and loss, yet he had discovered the extraordinary power of simple human connection. The valley, his ranch, and the memories of those who had visited would remain with him, reminders that one act of kindness could grow into a legacy stronger than fear, stronger than isolation, and stronger than any challenge life might bring. Elias understood finally that his life had meaning not because of the land he owned or the isolation he maintained, but because of the way he chose to live, open-hearted, patient, and willing to act with care. The valley had become more than home. It had become a place of trust, hope, and quiet inspiration. And in that realization, Elias found peace, knowing that the ripple of his choices would continue to touch lives for generations to come.